All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Tony Simone. We'll do intros here in a second, but just wanted to say that I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join us, and hopefully this provides some good value for you. So I'll let Ellen introduce herself first. Go ahead, Ellen.
Hey everyone, I'm Ellen Sofronas. I'm the cybersecurity strategist and growth manager at Rutter Technologies. I also have a background in cybersecurity for critical infrastructure in the state of New Hampshire, as well as a master's in education. So I like to combine all of that into a fun multi-use role here.
Great, great, thanks. And again, I'm Tony Simone. I'm a field CISO at Lumify Cyber. We're an MDR and we're partnered with Rutter to deliver a specific set of security services. I'm not going to dive into that today, not a sales pitch. But I've got about, over 30 years of experience now in information security. I started off in military information warfare, moved into the commercial sector, spent a long time at AT&T running the SOC for MSSP services there, doing a lot of threat detection, DDoS defense, a variety of things. Left there, built my own MDR, co-founded an MDR, managed detection and response company. And just 3 years ago, within a month now, was acquired by Lumify, and here I am, still working to build the company and keep growing. In my role as field CISO, this is actually one of the things I will do, not so much the presentation part, but actually working with our clients, both pre-sales and post-sales, to make sure they understand how to prioritize what they need from a security perspective, get the best bang for the buck on their security tools. All right, so we'll jump right in here.
Right. So, why most security investments miss the mark? I'm just going to kick this right off. So, we see this across our client base, small to large, does not matter the size of the business. It's not more or less by size, it's really just proportional. There are many challenges here, right? You see alarms and alerts, and it gets very overwhelming for your internal IT team. There's no overlap, there's no clear signal. Where's it coming from? False alarms, false positives, just kind of putting out fires everywhere. And most organizations, they're not ignoring cybersecurity. In many cases, they have invested heavily, but the investments may not be aligned to the heaviest areas of exposure. And so we're really just seeing through that MSSP lens, how can we help convert that noise into signal? How can we help this organization understand what is urgent and what is important and what is simply redundant?
Yeah, and just like you said, Ellen, I see this across our entire client base too. And it's interesting, it doesn't really matter if you're a small customer, large business, whatever. You may be a smaller business with a smaller set of tools, a large business with a large set of tools. It's really kind of proportional, right? And sometimes that security team, or it may be that one person wearing the security hat at the moment, they have a lot of tools and a lot of challenges, a lot of things they're trying to wrangle and pull together. So it's definitely it's always a challenge. It's never an easy button in this space.
So here's a better way to think about cybersecurity. So we have kind of 8 anchor questions to align security with risk, cost, and outcomes. So we're going to kind of go through these. And as we step through them, I want you to think about your program, your business, your risks, your challenges. So we're going to take them kind of one at a time, a little bit of overlapping here, but they're a better structure for security planning because they move the conversation from what tools do we need to what outcomes are we trying to achieve, right? So these questions help clients answer, on an ongoing basis, not once a year, but also, and not just during renewal season, but really what's happening on a day-to-day basis, or even if you just revisit them quarterly, just really keeping them in the forefront. What are these areas that we need to invest in? What are our financial impacts? What are we overusing, underusing? All of these things, they should constantly kind of be in the forefront of your mind as you're assessing your systems.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and jump right in then. The I think the first key question, and this is just a great question to ask yourself periodically, regardless, is are we investing in the right security areas? And it has to be grounded in reality. Uh, I think one of the things people forget sometimes is that despite it being an attack vector that has been around for a very long time, phishing is still the largest attack vector out there, even in this age of mythos and AI hacks and everything else. Phishing is how a lot of attackers get in. Credential theft is also huge, right? There are just way too many folks reusing passwords, both across business and personal accounts, blending their work and their personal systems. Um, and then, of course, ransomware, right? You're not going to have too many security conversations without talking about ransomware. It's a big red flag. But remember that ransomware is usually the outcome of an attack, not the attack itself, right? It's what happens after they got in. And depending on your business, certainly those are huge threats. Insider risk could also be a really big threat, right? If you are a business that manages big numbers of money, or if you've got intellectual property that's worth a tremendous amount of money, right, then you have an insider risk problem as well. Remote exploits, and we're hearing a lot in the media right now about AI-driven attacks. Those matter. Those are important. Those are definitely sort of scary things, and AI is sort of accelerating that whole process. But that's not the only thing out there, and it's important not to get pulled in on, what's the hot topic du jour.
Yeah, exactly. Like as Tony just said, that hype on those headlines. I mean, every day the news is AI everywhere, right? So that hype, well, those headlines are big. That should not be driving your decision making. You really need to think about what your business is doing and what it's working around, and not let that kind of drive a decision and a spend that doesn't reduce your risk, perhaps.
Right. And because of that, sometimes investments go wrong, right? Because of the attraction of a tool or, the hot topic of the day or whatever it might be, sometimes our spend doesn't go to the right things. A lot of organizations spend heavily in areas that don't necessarily map to the real risk posed against them. Just like I was talking about before, right? Phishing, still big. But a lot of organizations will say, well, my mail service has phishing protection. I'm good. I'm all set. But is it really effective? Is it actually catching everything? Another big one is mobile devices, personal devices, BYOD. That's very common in the modern age, right? But have you invested in mobile device management or protection from, those roving users, right? So a lot of times these things are misaligned.
Exactly. And really having good strategic partners that can help you kind of take a step back and do a risk register, some assessment findings, incident trends, and business impact discussions can really be useful to kind of build a roadmap around, are you investing in the right areas versus maybe over investing in areas that aren't going to give you the most bang for your buck there. So what is the financial impact of a cyber risk, right? You have to think about this is, your mindset shift. Cybersecurity risk has to be translated into business impact. Cybersecurity is no longer an IT conversation. It is a business strategic conversation. It needs to be happening at the top, at that C-suite level. So you need to think about all the different available entry points for your threat landscape. You need to think about all of the risks that you're carrying. You need to think about the cost of downtime, of recovery, of lost productivity, of penalties, of reputational damage, of customer trust, third parties that you're involved with, where it could get in by third parties, or you could spread it out to third parties. It is a lot of risk and a lot of vulnerabilities to be thinking about. So these are no longer just that, oh, it's red light, yellow light, green light situations. It is really calculating and quantifying your risk to a number. And how do you assess that? That's something I do on a regular basis with clients and customers. We sit down and really look at that. So if you're actually down due to some type of cyber event, what does that look like? What does it cost you on an hourly basis, 24 hours a day, for the number of days that you're down?
Yeah, and you know when you say things like we sit down, we calculate, people get a little apprehensive sometimes. It can sound really daunting, but it's not as difficult as or as arduous as you would think, right? And folks like Alan,
Right.
myself, there are people, there are tools, there are things here that can help you through this process and expedite it to really get to the core.
So, rethinking ROI in cybersecurity. So, when we think about return on investment, we're thinking about what are we getting back financially, but actually, what we really need to be thinking about when it comes to cybersecurity is what are we saving in risk, right? In dollars. So, if you're investing, say, $5,000 a month in really strong cybersecurity tools for your company, and that reduces your risk of $500,000 or $1 million, that is a return on your investment. That is a huge amount of money saved. And starting to rethink return on investment and how it ties back to cybersecurity is a mind shift that we need to start talking about in making. We're not actually thinking about dollars in pockets, but dollars saved. So that's really that mind shift that we need to be working on. So if we can consolidate tools, reduce duplicative licensing and other things, and really invest in areas that drastically reduce your risk and reduce the financial risk that you're carrying as a business. So go back to that, tool where we talk about what are you carrying in risk, and we can find out that dollar amount and then reduce it through educated and informed decisions around cybersecurity and IT investments. You can really see a massive return on investment through reduction in risk and saving those dollars.
Yeah, and I like the way you frame that, Ellen, and the way you do define it because, you know, as an old school security guy, I will say that I was in that sort of there's no such thing as ROI in cybersecurity camp for a long, long time, right? But it's really about understanding what ROI means in this sense, right? It's not about dollars. You know, some business leaders, your board, your CEO, your CFO, they might want things defined in dollars, and ROI is oftentimes defined in dollars. But when we're talking about cybersecurity, it's really, as Ellen said, it's about risk reduction, it's about cost avoidance, it's about efficiency, it's about improvements that you get and protection that you get.
Exactly.
And so then we think about like, well, what about the tools we have? What about the tools we don't have? Are we overspending? Are we trying to buy too many things? Are we spending too much on one thing? And then do we have tools that we're really not getting good use out of? Right? Most organizations probably have more capability out there than they realize, right? So it's about focusing on the risks and how you're going to cover them. It's also important to remember too, we talk about overlap and redundancy. That's not always a bad thing, right? An old security mantra, of course, defense in depth, layers. It's just make sure that you don't have too many overlaps that are costing you a lot of money when that money could be shifted a better way.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes the answer is not a new purchase. Sometimes it's just improving what you already have. License, perhaps it's a different configuration, or just clarifying ownership over something. Maybe you don't know who's in charge of that.
Yeah, and you might already own the solution, right? So, are we fully using what we have right now? Sometimes the challenge is really just bringing it all together, knowing what you have and getting all of the information that you need to be able to monitor and have the visibility in your environment and the protection in your environment. An important thing too, we've got this nice little chart up here, and I know sometimes when you're looking at security tools, you could have a big list or a set of checkboxes. They're not checkboxes, right? You don't have to check off one in every area. Certainly, many of these tools are valuable, and you probably would want to have a lot of these if you could afford them all. But don't think of it that way. Think of it as what is the right capability to match against the risks and the threats.
Exactly.
You know, we have it on here also, and I'll mention it really quickly before we move on. But we've got backup on here, and a lot of people might say, "Well, backup's an IT tool. That's not a security tool." It's
Right.
important to remember that backup is a security tool, right? Because if you get hit by ransomware or something else that destroys your data, locks up your data, you're going to ask yourself real fast, "Do I have good backups? Can I actually recover quickly, or am I facing a really ugly decision?"
Exactly, because that backup is critical. Insurance companies are often, and this just came out in the newest Verizon DPIR report, that they're just not paying the ransomware anymore. So if you don't have the backup, you are often left with nothing, right? So you need that backup. You need it offsite. You need it secure. You need to be able to recover from that, because the ransomware, the insurance companies are often done just paying for that to unlock it. And so unless you have all the funds to pay the ransomware, and hope you do actually, the ransomware is paid and actually unlocked to get that backup, the easiest, most affordable way to get your business up and running again is to actually have really high quality backups offsite elsewhere that you have access to, so you can just resume business in a normal way without losing a lot of money.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. You don't know if the ransomware uh, attackers will actually unlock for you, or if they even have the right key. We've actually seen that happen in the real world, where
Mm-hmm.
even the ransomware attackers were not able to unlock it, and people lost data. So that
So how, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, yeah, no, I was gonna say, so that brings us to our security program piece, and I'll let Ellen take off here in a second, but I just want to point out this is another one of those very old mantras in cybersecurity, right? Protection is desired, but detection is required. Go ahead, Ellen.
No, I was just going to say, prevention matters, but it's prevention is not the strategy, right? It's not alone is your only strategy. You really need to have everything in place here,
Yeah, I look at it as it's not an if, it's a when, right? Breaches will happen.
right?
It's really your effectiveness. The effectiveness of your security program is not just about did you stop it from happening. It's did you detect it quickly and react to it
Mm-hmm.
quickly before it became something really bad, before it started to cost you a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort, right? I think it's
Exactly.
interesting too. We talk about measuring effectiveness after the perimeter is crossed. We're using a more of a modern definition of perimeter in this sense. We still talk about perimeter, but in the modern cloud and mobile age, the perimeter from a traditional sense is very wide and hazy now. It's really just about, has somebody compromised something? Are they in a device? Have they taken over an account? That's really your perimeter now.
Mm. So what actually reduces risk, right? You have your mean time to detection. So that's like how long an adversary operates inside your environment before anyone notices. And then your mean time to response is how long it takes to contain and hopefully evict once that alarm finally sounds. And we used to measure that in much longer terms. And now what used to be measured in hours or sometimes even days is now really reduced to a much shorter time. So how do we measure that? How do we get these people out of our system? How do our alarms go off much more quickly? So this business impact is very straightforward. Faster detection leads to shorter dwell time and a smaller blast radius. We talk about that blast radius. You have this whole, that wide net that Tony was just talking about. You don't have this small perimeter anymore because everything's in the cloud. You're interconnected to third party people. Everything kind of, that blast radius just gets bigger and bigger and bigger the longer it sits there. So how do we do this? How do we shorten this? So it's really important that we have the right tools in place, the right partners in place, so that we can actually get through a faster detection, a shorter dwell time, and reduce that blast radius.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, at Lumify, that's what we're all about, right? Managed detection and response. It's all about rapid detection and response. And as Ellen was just saying, it wasn't that long ago that we measured these things in hours or even days. It was very common. I've been in the MSSP MDR space for a very long time now. It wasn't that long ago that your standard SLAs or SLOs were hours or days, depending on the severity of the detection, the alert. But now it's minutes, and it has to be, right? We're seeing both AI orchestrated or even human with a lot of automation orchestrated attacks that progress from that you clicked on the wrong thing in a phishing email, or there was a new 0 day and there was a hole and a way in, to just minutes before escalation, spread, lateral movement, and full compromise, ransomware, whatever it might be, right? Those are the minutes that matter, right? Your tools, your firewall, your WAF, all of these things, they're blocking all the time. They're doing their job. But that one thing that gets through, that's that bad moment that might come up. And that also might be the moment that you need
Mhm.
insurance.
Exactly. And insurance needs to align with your compliance. So it's really important to understand that when you are setting up tools, that your tools need to align with your insurance and security. They all need to come together to an agreement. So your insurability really has to do with your risk. And it goes way back to what I was talking about earlier when I sit down, or Tony or somebody else sits down and helps you kind of quantify your risk. When we're doing that and we're helping you kind of understand what you have in place and where those gaps are, we're typically doing that in alignment with NIST or CIS controls. And we're doing that because it also aligns with the cyber liability policies that hopefully you all have. And they are more robust when you buy them independent from a rider on your insurance. So having an independent cyber policy is always the best way to go. I do not sell insurance. I'm going to say that right now. I have worked alongside insurance brokers for my career within cybersecurity. Specifically, when I worked previously in the state of New Hampshire, I worked with an insurance person every day. It was really important. And so there was a lot of education around insurance and understanding that when you put controls in place, they needed to align with your insurance, and you needed to actually do the things within your policy, such as enforce multi-factor authentication, not just turn it on and try to encourage people to do it, but actually enforce it. Follow all of these different regulatory compliances that your business requires. So if you're a SOC 2, you need to be doing all of that. If you align with that and you're saying you're going to do that and your insurance policy expects that, you need to be doing that. So everything needs to align. You need to have your controls in place. Everything comes together. And I will tell you that they will not pay out if they're going to try to find a loophole. If you're not doing what you say you're doing and you don't have the right alignment with your managed security service provider, if everything doesn't come together in that nice little triangle you see in front of you, they will deny that claim. So it's important to understand all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and another important thing is drift, right? Even if you've
Right.
got a good compliant change control process and program and you're doing the right things there, every one of those changes is like a little nibble, right? You're constantly changing the landscape. And sometimes when you're making those changes, you don't really see the broader impact of it, which is why it's so important to have these periodic reviews and take a look and say, what does my landscape look like now? What does the
Mhm.
environment look like now after all of these changes have sort of rippled together? Drift happens, right? And that's why you have to
Yep.
review them holistically. But then, sometimes you've got to call the insurance still.
Yep. And so what happens? So when you do have a claim or you think you're having an incident, just quickly, the very first thing you do is detach yourself from the internet. That's what you do. You just unplug from the internet and then you notify your insurance company. You do not attempt to fix things yourself, and you do not do anything that can throw your system off, because every insurance company has a different protocol. And the minute you kind of mess around with your own system, you could actually make your policy null and void. And that's really important to understand. And even with the best of intentions, you think, oh, this is a small little thing. I'm not really sure if this is a cyber incident. I'm not really sure. Maybe this is my MSP doing something. Maybe this is an internal employee in the IT system doing, there's all these things because you don't want to think it's happening to you. Right. And we all want this to never be a cyber incident. No one wants that. So you really need to be aware that the best thing for your business is to remove yourself from the internet, notify your insurance company, because they all handle things differently. They all have different partners that they want to use. They have forensics teams, they have attorneys, they want, it's a whole system of people coming together now trying to solve these. And insurance companies, this is a common occurrence and it's costing them tremendous amounts of money. It's really important that you follow the procedure properly so you don't get burned as a business. Cyber incidents can be a little speed bump for your business, or it can be a business ending experience. And a lot of it has to do with the controls you have in place and how you handle suspected cyber incidents.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, just like you said, Ellen, insurance can dictate who you're going to use. And in fact, they may call them in. You might not even make the call yourself, but they can dictate who you use for forensics, for response, for even legal. Uh, that's
Mhm.
the way these go. And not that anybody wants to sit down and pour through the pages and pages and pages of their cyber insurance plan, but it's important to know that. It's important to know what they require of you and what that process looks like.
Exactly.
So coming back to our question set, right? The next up, where are the most common gaps? So we've talked about phishing, we talked about identity, right? Those are critical, right? Those we see these a lot in the real world. Those are the things that lead to breaches. Could be and so identity and email, we flag those as really hot because those are some of the most common ones that are happening out there. That's not to say that endpoint protection isn't important. It is. It absolutely is. Uh, but these are areas where we need to take a look at what are the real threats, what are the risks, what's actually happening, what is the most common thing, both industry wide and in my specific vertical and my type of business, and make sure that we're aligning our protection against those.
Exactly. And that's where a good partner can help just understand what you have and where you could really fill in those gaps.
Yeah. And not all fixes are equal, right? You need to prioritize. Once you understand your risks, then you can look at your responses to them. Ellen mentioned MFA before, right? That is absolutely one of those, key pieces that you need to have in place everywhere, just getting rid of legacy auth. Now, this particular chart isn't necessarily prescriptive for everyone. These are just some examples, but these are ones that, we tend to see a lot. Log correlation, whether that's, a data lake and some sort of search tools, analytics tools, or full-blown SIM, UEBA, right? Those things are, you know, really powerful tools, but they're also high effort tools. Those are, regardless of what a vendor may tell you, they are not set it and forget it. They require a significant level of both cost and effort to get them off the ground. Those are things that you have to plan for. Those are things that you just can't turn and flip the switch on.
Exactly. So, how prepared are we to respond, right? So, prepared and unprepared organizations may experience the same initial event, but the outcomes can be very different. The difference is often based on speed, right? How quickly did the organization detect what was going on? How quickly did they escalate it? Did they contain it? Did they communicate it? And did they recover? Every hour has a cost. So going back to that assessment again, where we can tell you what risk, how much risk you're carrying and calculate that down to an hourly rate. When you're down, how much is it costing you per hour for your business to be down? And then you multiply that by the hours down. You can very quickly become 6, 7 figures if your business is, is just sitting stagnant, waiting because you can't do anything. Sometimes, unfortunately, that happens because insurance companies stop you and you're just stalled because an insurance company is investigating. That can happen, but don't let it be at your own hands because you're not ready to respond. If you have the right systems in place and you have, you're ready, then you can actually go through the process of being able to respond. You know who's calling the insurance company. You know how to, where all of your internet connections are. You're going to unplug everything. You know who's doing what. All of that's been worked out ahead of time so that you are ready.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's important to remember this is a challenge for everybody, right? This is a
Yep.
challenge for most orgs because this is probably not your core business. Most of you listening in today are probably not in the cybersecurity business. You might be a manufacturer, you might be delivering healthcare, you might be doing a lot of other things. Cybersecurity is probably not the thing that you do every day, but it's something that you have to do as part of your business. But you can be prepared, as Ellen was saying, right? You've got to have those incident response plans, business continuity plans. You've got to work
Mm-hmm.
on the insurance side of the equation. There's a lot of pieces that you have to have put together so that you can react. And sometimes it's your partners that you can lean on to help you in that process, whether it's, tightening that detection time down and that response time down, or doing the planning, doing the right engagements to get those plans built and to test them.
Exactly. So plans are vital to have, but they are only as good as your familiarity with them. You need to be having dry runs of these plans. So you create a business continuity plan and a response plan, and then you practice it. You do tabletop exercises. You meet as a team, you go through that plan, you figure out who's doing what, how do we respond. You make sure you have backup people for the people who are assigned each role, because what if something happens on a day that someone's out traveling for business, or someone's out sick or on a bereavement leave or PTO. I have used to do this on a regular basis, almost daily, with some different groups of people. And lo and behold, we would sit down and we'd go through it and we'd learn something new, or someone would be absent and we wouldn't know, oh no, who's going to do this today because that person's missing, or we stumbled into this problem that we didn't anticipate, or something happens every time you go through it, and you learn every single time. And every time you go through your plan, you improve, you get better, you get faster, you learn, oh, I didn't realize Tony was really good at that role. I'm going to assign him that role. From now on, he's in charge of this. And you start really figuring out where everybody's strengths are and who's better at what in those emergency responses and how you're going to go through it. And well, it's often an annual requirement of your insurance to do those tabletop exercises. It is highly recommended that you do them quarterly. Just those 4 times a year, just practice, practice, practice. It really does make a huge difference. Sometimes it seems silly. People sit down like, oh, I can't believe we're doing this again. It truly, and I'm sure Tony has the same experience, like you learn something every single time and you get better and more efficient. And that's the whole point of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I've participated in a bunch of these over the years, and it is a great process, right? And I don't think, even when I have seen repeats, right? People might walk into it ahead of time thinking, we got to go do this again. But then in the moment they get into it, they realize just how important it is. And oftentimes you find, especially the first few times through, that, oh, maybe we didn't include all of the right people, or maybe we needed that person also. Oh, we didn't even think to include marketing because there might be a press release that has to be associated with this, and possibly blessed by your insurance. But, there's oftentimes you start to really find all of the pieces, all of the levers that have to be pulled, and it's worth doing these tests for different scenarios. I think ransomware is probably one of the most common that I see all the time because it can be so terribly impactful. But there are other scenarios that can certainly work out depending on your environment. Even physical, simulated physical test scenarios can work out great. But just as Ellen said, you are going to find gaps every time, and you should, right? No plan is perfect. The environment changes, the world changes, threats change. Even if you think you've got your plan buttoned down, you're going to find gaps, and that's the point, right? One of the great things I personally feel, especially from my former military background, is that these exercises are a great way to experience the fog of war without actually being at war, right? One of the things you find really quickly if you've never done one is that when you start getting tidbits of information and this system is down, or this system's acting weird, or you're getting these ransom notes, or these things are popping up, or you have no visibility into whatever, you don't know the whole picture. You can't see, because somebody behind the scenes is orchestrating all of this. In the real world, that's the attacker, but in the real world also, you don't know. You only have the data that's coming at you. And so you learn to make decisions. You learn to ask the right questions. And that's an important part of that detection and response process.
Absolutely. So then the question is, based on all of that and all of those testing and those plans, are we being strategic or are we being reactive, right? So when you're reactive, you're firefighting. You're just making one-off purchases. You get these little scares. Maybe you go through a tabletop exercise and you find that you are missing a tool, or you think you're missing a tool that might help you in a situation because the tabletop exercise put you in a situation. And so you react and you spend money and you buy a tool that you think is going to fix it. That might not be the right solution. So it's going back to everything we've talked about, right? You want to be strategic. You want a risk-based roadmap. You want to think about all the different risks you have. You want a budget that, is defended by numbers, that makes sense, that reduce that risk, that aligns with your insurance, that aligns with your regulatory compliances that you need to meet. You want to really be a strategic shopper when it comes to your cybersecurity tools and your IT tools. And again, this is a business strategic conversation that starts at that C-suite level. It's no longer an IT only conversation. This really all ties together. So you want to make sure that you are not just starting from zero, that you are just throwing, fire blankets on different emergency situations. You want to have a real high level conversation around what are you carrying for risk? Where are your gaps? How do you plan for the future? What can you afford this year? And how are you going to plan out future years? Where can you get the most bang for your buck in cyber right now? So again, starting with some of those smaller things, which also happen to be a lot of the least expensive things like MFA, things like that. Some of the biggest bang for your buck are the least expensive items and really drastically can reduce your risk. It really depends on your business and what you need, but you need to really think from the top down, how can we strategically plan a long-term roadmap that is going to help us really maximize cybersecurity?
Yeah. And having been in the MDR space for such a long time now, I can tell you from experience, I've seen it, right? What Ellen was talking about earlier, knee-jerk reactions are usually bad ones, right? We want to react, we need to react. Just like we were talking about with the insurance conversation earlier, you might want to react and try to contain this, try to fix this, try to go change this. Maybe that's not the best plan, right? The same is true when you're trying to think about what are the right tools, what are the right processes, what are the right pieces I need to plug in place to improve my cyber posture, my resiliency, my ability to detect and respond. You don't want to make those quick decisions because of a fire that just happened, or because a vendor rolled in and gave you a fancy demo and promised you the world and said it was going to fix everything. Right? It never does. Some products are great and they do what they say, and some are not. But it's important to make those decisions, as Ellen said, strategically. And not every risk needs a tool. As I was just talking about, sometimes it's a tool you plug in, sometimes it's a process. Sometimes you just need the right people and processes to deal with things, to be able to mitigate something. And this is one of those areas where you really start to demonstrate some maturity in your security program when you think strategically about it, when you plan out what is the right move, when you don't just throw a blanket on the fire and knee jerk, right? How do we deal with the risks and apply a control? And a control is not always a tool, right? Sometimes it's insurance. Sometimes we're just transferring the risk elsewhere. Sometimes we're accepting risk, or we're saying, let's have some compensating controls for this risk.
Exactly. And so we'll move on to what does it look like, right? What does good look like? And good is, maybe a mediocre word for this, but it's really not. Being good across the board is excellent. You have your risks mapped, your tools are optimized, your gaps are prioritized, your response is ready. That's a lot of work to be good across the board. It's a lot of work. It's a big investment. It requires really good partners to come together and prioritize and figure everything out and get that roadmap ready. Having a good MSSP, having a really solid, whether they're with you, if you have a really solid internal IT team, it's still good to have an MSSP to kind of bounce ideas off of and get some support from. They don't need to be a full-time managed service partner. They just are there for security and kind of getting good tools from and going through the process with. They don't need to manage your internal stuff. They can be that kind of co-partner, if you will. And having that team in place and having really good partners like Lumify and other cybersecurity partners in place to support you in your business, it takes a lot of work. And that's what it looks like, having all of these in place, putting all that effort in, knowing where you're heading, being able to justify the dollars that you've spent to your board, to your C-suite team, to anybody, that you can say, this is why we made these decisions. This is why we spent these dollars. This is why we were able to reduce our risk. This is how we went about it. This is the plan moving forward. We feel confident and comfortable if and when we have a cyber event, more likely when, not if, unfortunately, this day and age. And we're just going to be able to feel comfortable to justify what we're doing from a cybersecurity standpoint because we're good. And this is what good looks like.
Yeah, that's great. And your point early on was so spot on. Of good sounds like such a mediocre term, but to be able to check all of these boxes, to feel like you've got things mapped out, that you understand where your risks are, that you're matching the right tools and controls against those, that you know where your gaps are and you know what you're doing to try to address them. Those are all huge steps. As Ellen said, that's what your partners are for, right? I think most of us, that are listening in are probably not on a, cybersecurity company. That's not your bread and butter every day. There's something else that is your core business, right? And that's why partners are there to help. We're bringing in the right folks who are there to help. And so really what it comes to, here's a great question that you should pose to yourself. Just like we started with a question to pose to yourself, we'll kind of wrap up with one. Uh, what is, if you could reallocate 20% of your cyber spend today, where would it go? And I'm not saying new budget addition. I'm not saying, cut 20%. I'm just saying if you could take some of your cybersecurity budget and reallocate it, where would it go? That's not an easy question to answer, even for people who are well prepared. But going back to everything we've been talking about, if you've mapped out your risks, if you understand your gaps, if you understand your needs, and you have priorities, then you could answer this. And you might, if you've been through this, you might be able to say, yeah, I know exactly what I want to do next, or I know exactly where I want to shift some of my budget so that I can actually have a better outcome.
Exactly. It's a really hard question to answer. It really is. I don't even know where I would start. I guess I'd have to own a business to make that decision, but I know where I'd like to point people, but it really depends. I mean, sometimes you can save 20% of your budget just by doing that assessment and figuring out where you have some overlap. And then suddenly you find you have 15 to 20% of your budget free. And then where would it go? That's really where this question came from.
Yeah, and where do you start?
Yeah. So where do you start? We help organizations move from this uncertainty to really understanding and having some pretty good clarity pretty quickly. So we're trying to help people it all starts with that assessment. It all starts with understanding, what do I carry in risk? If you don't understand what you carry financially in risk, it's really hard to understand where to go. How do you reduce your risk? What tools are going to do that? So you need that assessment. You need to understand that. You need to quantify your risk. You need to look at what you have in place and then optimize that. Make a roadmap. That's really where you start.
Yeah. All right. And I think that kind of brings it all back together again. That's where we wanted to be. So this is pretty much it. This was the presentation, the hopefully good information that we had for you today. I think we can open it up to questions and answers now. I don't know if we have any questions out there. Just give me a moment, team. We're having a little technical gotcha here, just trying to get this lined up. There we go. Okay.
Okay, I see the questions coming in now. Tony, do you see questions?
I was just moving it around. Yeah, there we go. Okay,
Okay,
so
great.
um, I'll see any way we can get some of this info going forward. Yes, I think this is being recorded. I'm sure this is being recorded. I heard it tell me that at the beginning. So yeah, we'll have that. We'll jump to the next one from Scott. How does cost per hour for downtime apply to government and nonprofits? I think Ellen, that might be a better one for you.
Sure. So, government and nonprofit. So, I've worked in a nonprofit. We are also CMMC certified. So, government organizations are something that we'll be working with DoD contracts potentially in the future. Um, it doesn't really, downtime does not change for government and nonprofits in the sense that you still have downtime. Your downtime is calculated based off of how many employees you still have to pay around the clock. You still have to pay your rent, pay for all your utilities. It really doesn't change downtime. It alters based on, nonprofits typically make less, government typically make a little bit less. So it does change a little bit, but there's not a huge difference in how it gets calculated. So that would be something, if my contacts are in this, I'm happy to meet with you if you'd like to just figure it out more specifically, but we could go through that.
All right. The next one I saw was from Anonymous. How do you take an organization through a tabletop exercise? That's a great question. I'm not going to get into all of the details of how you actually take them through it, but what I can tell you is that I think both of our organizations have professional services people. We have folks who are skilled in these areas who conduct these or can bring in the right teams to conduct them, organize them. But typically there's a planning phase before the tabletop of what type of scenario do you want to go into? And who do you want to come in blind versus prepared? And then there's the actual exercise itself, which is oftentimes just a half day to a day type run. And then there's usually whoever is orchestrating the entire process will then come back with a lot of feedback, follow up, documentation. Ellen, you have anything to add on that also?
Um, yeah, I mean, mine mostly were done I did a lot with nonprofits, public entities, so like schools and police and fire. So that's kind of where my focus was, not in the public sector. So a lot of the time, we would go in with a plan, and only administration would know what we were doing. And we would kind of throw random things at them, or we would meet, and if it was a larger organization, in two smaller groups and do two different things. It just kind of depended on the situation. But basically what Tony described, we just go in with a plan of what we're going to throw at you, what type of cyber event, and then assess how it goes, and then come back at how do we fill in those gaps, how do we fix that for the next time, and just rinse and repeat over and over.
Yeah. And then following on with that, what is the cost of doing a tabletop exercise? Oh, I would have to get you a quote on that. I can tell you they're typically in the thousands, right? Not millions by a long shot. But yeah, we would have to look at the scope of the tabletop, and we can certainly get you a quote on that if you want to follow up after. All right. Any other questions? Anything else? Well, great. Well, we appreciate everyone joining today. Thank you for carving out a little bit of time. Hopefully this was valuable to you, and hopefully we'll see you again in a future cast.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. Thank you, Tony. And thank you, Lumifi, for hosting this.
Absolutely.
Appreciate all the help.
Well, have a good day, everybody. Okay, the show is over now, officially stopped.
Fantastic. I think that went great.
Yeah, I thought it went really well. Yeah,
Yeah.